Thank you very much, Joe, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to give a research presentation on what I work on. Want to tell you all very early that I'm not obviously going to cover everything that early Earth can or cannot tell us, but I will just be going on some topics that I've been working on, and we'll just go from there. But before anything, I'd like to pay my respects to our First Nations people. They've used the rocks just as much as we have for various things. It's their library, the library of their own culture, holds a lot of information for them as much as it holds a lot of information for us. That's probably an aspect that we share, and I'd like to acknowledge that. But yes, I would like to like everyone to know that much of the work that I will be presenting today was done on the land of the Muwinina people, one of the oldest continuing cultures in the world. And I'm very grateful to have now a career in the lands of the Gadigal people. People in the room probably can't see what's in the top, but I'm guessing people on Zoom can. But since we have just started talking so much about ChatGPT, I just thought my first slide should be, what can and cannot early Earth tell us? What does ChatGPT tell you? Is it worth even coming to my talk? Because you could literally just type my question into ChatGPT and go, oh, well, I know everything about it. I don't need to go to this talk. So I decided, well, what does it come up with? It comes up with a lot, right? And then you can click this button here, regenerate response, and it'll come up with another load of text. So I've simplified it for you, just reminding everyone here that ChatGPT will actually require a lot of our research because it is using all that's available on the net right now. So unless we try and refurbish it, and it's the responses are going to get pretty damn boring. So anyway, so what does ChatGPT tell us? Chemical composition of early atmosphere, yes. Origins of life and evolution of life, but that's it. That's pretty pathetic. What can it not tell us? Limited data, uncertainty, and that is very complex, like what we didn't know that. So no, you have not wasted your time, may I mention, by coming to this talk of mine. Hopefully you'll get more out of this than this piece of AI information. What is it about early Earth? If you think about it, and I've used this picture here just to, I don't know, sort of capture your imagination. This is the world we live in today. And we've had 4.56 billion years of Earth's history. That's how much we have to uncover. And we have not been able to do that. And that's because it's just very bloody long. And we need the next generation of geoscientists, as much as we have worked on this entire Earth's time scale, to understand how we got from this side of the image, the rather exciting, I'd say. Don't want to be here though, but looks pretty amazing, to that. You have to imagine a situation where this has happened over billions and billions of years, and our imagination can only capture so much. And so we have to look at the rock record through Earth's history to actually understand how we have changed from this planet to the one that we currently live in and share with millions of species. And as we all know, we're quite interested in knowing what lies ahead for us in the future. But my point is, if we don't understand how we've come to be what we have, then how it is that we're able to predict the future. So early Earth, understanding early Earth and how that's evolved to its current state and the different time scales that the Earth system processes have evolved is very, very crucial to our understanding. And the slide won't change, so I will just click, yeah. So that's the Earth's timeline. I think it's gone, yeah. And so why study early Earth environments? I'll just give you an example of how I've studied early Earth to understand Earth's evolution side of things, how we can understand about how we can explore for natural resources, and a bit about astrobiology. We're looking for signs of life on Mars. I'm actually not quite sure if we understand signs of life on Earth. And it is vitally important to also note that we're looking for signs of life outside of Earth, assuming that it is going to be Earth-like. It's a massive assumption. And say if it is, say it is Earth-like, what part of Earth's history are we actually looking for? So we really need to understand how Earth has evolved in terms and how we define life. And then perhaps we will need or have everything that we will need to look for signs of life outside of Earth if it's Earth-like. Let's start with Earth evolution. So I arrived in Australia in 2014, and I was about to start my PhD under Professor Ross Larch, very well-known economic geologist. I was quite pumped up about economic geology. I couldn't wait. And my PhD title was The Boring Billion. And it was almost like trying to figure out, well, why is it boring? Apparently it's boring. Can we figure out why? So yeah, it was not very happening for me, I have to say. But that's how it started. I prefer calling it Middle Earth, and I'll probably go through why. But essentially, a lot of amazing evolutionary stuff happened earlier, much later in Earth's history, I should mention, as the graph shows you. And so you tend to think, is the pointer going to work? Yeah. That nothing much happened along here because all the macroscopic, all the dinosaurs and us here, not much happened there, I don't think. But anyway, a lot happens, right? In the rock record, if you see the paleontological rock record, anything older than this, it just gets boring. There's not enough stuff happening. Surely nothing happened. And so this is what I had to start my PhD with, articles like, why did evolution stall during the boring billion? Poison-filled boring billion years. Blamed on sulfur-loving microbes. Billion years of starvation, would you believe? Most boring time on Earth. And this was by my own supervisor. Life on Earth was nothing but slime for a boring billion years. And it's all this man's fault, really. I think late Professor Martin Brazier looked at carbon isotopes through time and noticed a very stable trend across the boring billion period, which is around 1800 million years to 800, and said, well, we can't have that sort of stability in carbon isotope signatures in the rocks. Must be some sort of stasis going on. And this is a paper by Lyons et al. 2021. He actually summarized it pretty well. This shaded box here, which you can't see, but you just have to trust me now, 1800 to 800. There's a lot of sort of not much happening situation. And then things sort of spike up just after the boring billion. And he attributes that much to oxygen in the atmosphere. It's because it was assumed that it was very low and flat. Nothing much happened until after the Proterozoic. And all of these geochemical proxies that we've used to understand Earth's redox conditions basically supported that hypothesis that surely nothing must have happened in terms of Earth's redox, lack of oxygen, and therefore that must have stalled evolution, because you and I know how important oxygen is. And therefore oxygen, if there's no oxygen, that must have stalled life. That was the initial idea, and it went well. People love talking, still do, about whether oxygen is important for evolution or whether it's the biological evolution that actually caused oxygenation. But it's a hot topic. But very soon, in 2014, also at the time of my PhD, I came across these articles that were looking at very complex life thriving under virtually no to very little oxygen conditions. So, and they are ancient analogs. So, modern analogs of ancient organisms. So then that begs the question, well, maybe oxygen is not all that important. Maybe there are other things that's going on. What do we actually mean by stalled evolution anyway? Does that mean nothing happened? Does that mean there was no life at all? Or was it just life was just super simple and nothing evolved as much as it should have? So then you start looking at, well, what happened? So everyone claims nothing happened between this time period. But if you actually look at the available, this is very important, the available paleontological rock record. So there's probably far more that's still waiting to be discovered. And I will give you examples of how things change. And which is why I don't think ChatGPT will ever be able to keep up with geologists, because we are uncovering new information pretty much every year. And so the available paleontological rock record tells us a lot of things happened. But the most important thing being the origin of the eukaryotic cell, 34 trillion of which you and I are made of as well. That was literally the benchmark of biological evolution. Without the evolution of that complex eukaryotic cell, we wouldn't be seeing any evolution on Earth today. So that was very puzzling to me, because all those papers that I was reading said, well, there's been no evolution. And when you dig deep, what were some of the milestones that you basically, milestones in early evolution? So as I mentioned, the transition from a very single-celled organism to a very complex cell. It just doesn't just happen in 1 minute or something. These things take time. Multicellularity, you and I are multicellular organisms. Multicellularity also had to develop. Origin of sex, for more diversification of organisms, you needed the origins of sex as well. And I realized that the reason why I was not getting a lot of traction was because of the fact that some of the diversity that we see is not visible to the naked eye. I think as humans, we are quite fascinated with big dinosaur fossils or whatever. But when things are happening on the micro world and it's not that visible to us, we don't necessarily get that excited. Even right now, I'm showing you this blank slide, right? But there's probably more microbes on this slide as we speak than the people in India and China. So if you basically just look deep enough, you will find way too much complexity, far more than you and I can actually comprehend. And here's a list of things. I'm sure ChatGPT will give you even a longer list about the importance of these microorganisms in our lives today, whether it's a human being, whether it's a dinosaur, whether it's a worm in the ground. The microbial biosphere is absolutely critical towards maintaining the diversity of species that we see on Earth today. They are the foundation of the biosphere. They're the first organisms. They've colonized Earth for a very long time and probably will after we're gone. And of course, their diversity is still unknown, and they live in a wide variety of environments. We know of extremophiles, highly acidic environments, highly hot or very cold environments, you name it, they're everywhere. So they are not to be taken lightly. And I'm going to play this video for you because I tried doing a little summary, but I figured that the video is far better than I could ever do. And so I'm just going to play it.
This is a phytoplankton. These tiny algae harvest energy from the sun to grow and reproduce, providing food for the entire ocean food chain as one organism feeds on another. This was how scientists traditionally viewed food webs, small things being eaten by big things. But this view leaves out one piece of the food web puzzle. Zoom in to a size 100 times smaller than the width of a hair, and you'll find the invisible missing link, a microbe. Microbes are easy to miss, and even scientists only relatively recently discovered just how abundant they are in the ocean. There are millions of bacteria and other single-celled organisms in just a spoonful of water. Microbes have many roles in the ocean food web. Let's explain. Ocean creatures are very sloppy when it comes to eating, so it is up to bacteria to pick up the mess. When tiny animal grazers like zooplankton chew through phytoplankton, they lose much of what they aim to eat. The phytoplankton are ripped apart by munching jaws, and the remnants of their food are released into the water. Microbes can then swoop in and absorb the tiny molecules that would otherwise go to waste. Microbes also get a nutritious feast when a phytoplankton is attacked by a virus. When the host cell dies, it expels its contents, including the newly grown viruses, into the ocean for the bacteria to feed on. Other ocean creatures expel nutrients in their excrement. All of this is fair game for hungry microbes that make up the diet of the ocean's tiniest grazers. The discovery of the microbial loop of dissolved molecules to microbes to grazers revolutionized the way we think about food webs in the ocean. Ultimately, it is thanks to this invisible cleanup crew that our ocean is a clean and clear home where underwater life can thrive.
So yes, they're small, but they're very, very significant. And that's what I think has been very important in my research so far, is giving credit to these microorganisms that played a massively important role in evolution of life. So just reiterating what the video actually said, this is what we know and don't know. So all our evidence that we have so far is based on what we know so far, but there's still far more discoveries to be made to improvise or improve our understanding of evolution of life on Earth. So to say that a certain Earth's period is boring because you can't find fossils is completely baffling. And this was at a museum in Harvard that basically represents, so this big circle here represents microbial diversity, and this tiny dot here is what plants and animals represent. This gives you an idea about how diverse and how large the microbial biosphere is. So what do we know milestones in early evolution? So we found we've made some amazing discoveries. So in 2017, there was a paper by Bengtson et al. Where three-dimensional fossils were very nicely preserved in rocks that were much older. So 1.6 billion years old, right in the boring billion. We've also uncovered more and more fossils, and I'm pretty sure we're going to uncover a lot more in the next few years. So then that begs the question, well, clearly it's not oxygen driving evolution. Perhaps we need to look at some of the other elements that are critical for life. So there are major elements, and then there are trace elements. And I chose to focus on the nutrient trace elements because the technique that I use can give us a very good idea on what the availability of some of these trace elements might have been in the oceans in the past. So just going through my method very, very quickly. So we've got black shales. I've looked at about God knows how many black shales, way too many, obviously. But yeah, that's the close-up of the black shale. Look for the pyrite that's forming in the black shales and analyze the trace element composition, particularly the bioessential trace element composition. And you create a database. So far we've got about, 6,000 pyrite analysis through time that we think is giving us an idea of what trace element availability might have been like in the past. Now, I just want to emphasize that that's based on the data that we have. There's only so much ARC funding and there's only so much industry funding. And the idea is to obviously improve the database, but we've made a start. And we've used an in situ technique. So this is a laser ablation technique. And so we've targeted very sedimentary syngenetic pyrite in black shales through time to get an understanding of what the trace element availability might have been like. And here's some of the, here's the paper that we published in 2018. And here's on your y-axis, you've got a list of critical elements that we need. and you've got time on the x-axis, and you just see that there was obviously a dip, and that's very similar to what others had said so far, but you do see a rise at around 1400. And I was very puzzled because I realized that this is the period when all those critical milestones were occurring in the rock record. So what's going on here? Instead of stalling evolution, we came up with the hypothesis, which we call the stress hypothesis. We know how the first complex cell was created. Biologists can argue about whether it's predation, which is one cell ingesting the other. Modern example here, amoeba sucking the guts out of the green algae, or it could have been an endosymbiotic relationship where the host here is the paramecium, and you've got these green zoochlorella, and they mutually benefit from one another. But that's up to biologists to argue. As a geologist, I want to understand what were the geochemical conditions that forced organisms to come in a symbiotic or a predatory relationship altogether. And I believe that it's this low trace element period here that put that environmental pressure on the organisms, whether to have a predatory relationship or a symbiotic one. It needed some form of trigger, and I think the low nutrient concentration must have imposed a stress, and organisms will have had to adapt to that stressful condition, and in the process evolved. And you see examples of that every day. So here's what the biological innovation, a list of biological innovations that occurred during the low trace element period, and it did increase, and that's when we have evidence for diversification. So no pain, no gain is essentially what I was trying to tell you. But again, I would like to mention this was done in 2018. Subsequently, we added more data and we looked into trace element utilization patterns by the 3 domains of life. And the more you dig into the biological research that's already being done on organisms, you will find how clever these microorganisms are. So for us to say that Earth had a condition where life didn't evolve is actually very naive, because microorganisms are incredibly capable of adapting to a wide variety. And that's the reason why they have survived on Earth and probably will survive for a long period of time. And that's because they have geostrategies. We have evidence for certain minerals being favored, or certain form of minerals being favored by organisms. Aragonite is favored over calcite, goethite is favored over hematite. And then there are other strategies, such as microorganisms having just outside there, they'll have a layer of calcite, hydrocerussite, and hematite. This has been uncovered in Antarctica. And as you would know, lead is very toxic, and that's to ward off any sort of predator. So organisms have evolved to use toxic elements in their advantage. So that's how clever microorganisms are. So for us to say that something didn't evolve is, like I said, very naive. Quorum sensing, I only learned of this not so long ago. They have their own communication system. It's called quorum sensing. The bacteria will, when they're on their own, if they want to know if there's someone else, they release these autoinducers, and they can have cell-to-cell communication. And if they want to ward off species that they don't want, they release a different kind of autoinducers, and they sort of detect them as a different species, and so they don't have to interact with. They have figured out some exceptional communication networks in bacteria alone. That's all the information that we know of. Imagine what we'll find out later on. This was an outcome of the JOIDES resolution cruise, where they resurrected microbes that were 20,000, was it? 20,000 feet below the ocean surface. And this glowing stuff there is the bacteria that sort of was resurrected after the core was recovered. So for 100 million years, these microbes were surviving on virtually no nutrients. So that's how capable and advanced they are. I don't think you and I could survive one night. I am already starving for dinner, I might mention. But no, seriously, like it's really quite remarkable. So the idea is that we have to continue to study early Earth because our understanding of evolution is also evolving. Nothing's fixed in stone. It's not E equals mc squared, and that's a fact. For us, it's observation. And as geologists, I'm sure you understand that it's a lot about our observations and how those get modified over the years as we uncover new information. And so how does the boring billion stuff looks like now? So you look at papers, you've got strong evidence for oxygenation. You've got me harping on about oxygenation in the boring billion. Some other research has also backed up my paper. Then there's other people saying there's no evidence. There's a response to that saying strong evidence. Can ChatGPT keep up with this? I don't think so. What about that? Ocean oxygenation at 1.36, out reevaluation puts. So this is like new information being discovered over the years that constantly revises what we come up with. So yeah, a lot has happened since 2016, including this graph that I showed you before. It was Lyons et al. 2014. That was his graph. Very boring indeed. Look what's happened here. We've got arrows here now. And so my point is that we will make advancement in early Earth and our understanding of Earth as a whole if we continue to do the research and generate new information. Another one that's on the making, I really like this, I'll go through it very quickly. We just knew how to focus on cellular and morphological features when we tried to understand about metazoans or animals. Once you get new technology in, as you can see, the molecular era, phylogenomics, half of the things I don't understand myself, but I'm just trying to show you that with advent of new technology comes new information. And then you suddenly start pushing back the origins of life further and further, evolution of life further and further back than you earlier thought. So this is a graph of stromatolites through time. I've been working with a thermal statistician on seeing if we can use some of our nutrient trends and temperature trends through time to predict this. And we all know what stromatolites are. This is a photograph from Shark Bay, and we all know how they form, but I'll just quickly go through it. They are these microorganisms that are wonderful and beautiful. They produce a lot of oxygen, and they were probably the first oxygen producers on our planet today. And they form these layer after layer by the sediment that's in suspension in the water column gets trapped into the gelatinous substances released by these microorganisms. But having looked at the stromatolite records through time, you're able to say when they were abundant or when they were not. So they are an incredible, valuable archives in Earth's history if we want to understand how oxygen evolved through time. Because this is a beautiful photograph by Tanya, and it's like a stromatolite microbial mat producing an oxygen bubble. So we looked at this and we used AI. We've got to use it in some way or the other. So the statistician, Dr. Ross Cochry, he did some random forest library, our version using that. And we looked at how well nutrients and temperature trends through time can predict the stromatolite trend. And so for each of these different periods that we asked the software to work on, certain elements or temperature, so trace elements and temperature were our predictors. We wanted to see which predictor was important at what time. So this is just very preliminary work. And so we see that there's a slight decline at number 1 as marked on the graph here, and that was just the prokaryotic community. We know in number 2 point here that there were eukaryotes developing, and so they might have faced some competition. This is a rather sharp decline, which is probably when eukaryotes developed and diversified into various habitats, and that compromised preservation of stromatolites. And this is the time when we have spoken of, or we know a lot about metazoan and microbial mat coexistence. And this is probably the time when that sort of coexisting relationship resulted. Usually the metazoan evolution is placed at 800 million years. But I think this data, and that's because there's this decline of stromatolites, and we think metazoans compromise the preservation. But really, if you see, the decline starts here, not really at 800. So it's probably, this was the time when metazoans needed microbial mats for the oxygen, because metazoans are higher organisms. But once we had enough oxygen in the atmosphere, they no longer needed that safe haven. And so that then that relationship got broken off. And that's when you start seeing the stromatolites again. Hypothesis. So I actually think, and then obviously it declined. So perhaps this is probably the time when metazoans evolved, not 800, much earlier. And this is just me blabbering on about this, right? What would I know? But hang on, something's happened here. Not so long ago, we have now found sponge fossils that are close to 900 million years. We've just found this. And we're going to find more things. And it's going to counter-argue with what people have said in the past. But that's the beauty of geology. We're going to find more information, and that's just going to keep improving our existing knowledge. On a completely unrelated note, I just had a real chuckle to myself when I read this. And we have a big brain. Now, I don't have a big brain, but I know someone who has a very large brain. Sorry, this is my only joke in the presentation. I just really wanted to put it in there. It's not related to metazoan evolution. We know that something's gone wrong in evolution over there. Anyway, pyrite geochemistry as an exploration tool. So that's another research line that I've been involved with. Again, looking at early earth environments and early mineral systems and how they develop, because we want to know if we can understand our early mineral systems so we can find new mineral systems. We need them. We are talking about net zero. We're talking about a carbon-free economy, but we need to get there and have these transition green metals. So I've worked on zinc and lead. So a lot of those black shells I was looking at host some of the world's largest zinc lead deposit. And I thought perhaps there is a trend of these black shells and their trace element composition that as we move further out of the deposit, maybe there's a change in the chemistry. And if there is, can mining companies use that as an exploration vector? So that was just a very initial study that I did. But luckily I got, and really thanks to the industry sponsors for supporting our project, we then subsequently had more data, and it essentially proved what we said earlier on, that it does actually work very well. And so you could use your understanding of early earth mineral systems to look for more for natural resources, which we will obviously need. This is a picture of zinc production, one of the earliest in the world, in Zawar in Rajasthan, India. My point is, we've needed mineral resources in the past, we need them right now, and we will need them in the future. And it is only through our understanding of early earth mineral systems that we will get to this much talked about net zero that I hear a lot on news these days. Like I said, we're looking for fingerprints of ancient life because we want to know whether there's life there on Mars or the oceans in Europa. But what does signs of life actually look like? Here's a picture. I have shown this to a lot of people, and they have unhesitatingly said, oh, that's petrified wood, a wood cell or plant cell. And that's because it looks like. There's no actual, other than it looks like, we don't know anything. So I'll show you this, and I'll show you this, and I'll show you this. They all look pretty similar to me, but what are they? This is a photomicrograph of heavy minerals, tungsten, alpha tracks emitted from radioactive zircons, right? This is, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that name. Yep, it's a fossil. Let's just go there. Acritarchs, I think. And that's something I've learned today, actually. It's a chemical garden. Plant-like structures formed by reactions between transition metal salts and aqueous anionic solutions. Like, this is what we're dealing with. If we get too familiar with what we already know, we're going to start looking for the very wrong things. And I think this is a fantastic paper just saying how some of very organic textures look very organic. And so when we uncover or recover samples from Mars, we're really going to have to be very careful about how we detect for signs of life. So what am I doing detecting signs of life? So I've looked at a few pyritized ammonites. Look at backscattered electron image. What can I get? Let's zoom in. So you can see these textures, and you can see they're both pyrite, but one's obviously replaced the original material and the other hasn't. How can we distinguish between the two? It's very hard. So we've done some compositional imaging, very easy, using the laser. And we've used, taken to the much dreaded statistical tool again, using clustering to see if there's clustering in the biological. We're obviously working on known samples to see if it works. And yes, the biological sample seems to be more clustered than the non-biological bits of this. So just specifying, this is the biological area, the zoomed in version that I showed you earlier. And these coarser grain ones are just the infilling of the shell. Now, this is just a start. We've also submitted proposals to see if the pyrite is replacing the organic material, that will have a different suite of microorganisms. So perhaps the trace elements that's going in the pyrite may have a different speciation compared to the pyrite precipitating elsewhere, not on the biological bit. We don't know. We have to investigate more. But if there's a fossil available, it's pretty straightforward. But when you come across textures like this, you wonder, well, I'm not quite sure if it's biological or not. It may be. And then you always have to put that line in your paper with a question mark, because that's all you can do. If you don't put that question mark, the reviewer will virtually kill you. So that's all we've got right now. So we really need to figure out a way to be sure if something is biological or not. And then that begs the question, what is life like outside of Earth? We are very happy to use our Earth knowledge, but are we sure that what we're looking for outside of Earth is Earth-like? I don't know. I don't think ChatGPT knows either. So that's a question that we have to answer at some point. But yeah, there are limitations of what we can understand from early Earth, but then there are lots of benefits and advantages as well. I promise you, this is my last slide. This has been very important to me so far. I've noticed a really, I'm sure not just me, I'm sure everyone has noticed that we get a really bad name, and these are very old references actually. I think we can find a few more. And I think there was another article about how geologists do a shocking job of actually communicating what we do. And really, I think we need to take some lessons from bacteria, given that they're pretty good at what they call is the quorum sensing. I actually got this out of an article. With our many different languages, cultures, and nuances, humans have a long way to go before our communication structure rivals bacteria. Our ways of communication, particularly geologists, is really not up to the mark. And so I just thought, instead of saying thank you, I'd say, let's just do something about getting geoscience out there in the public, amongst our first-year students, so they continue to study this really amazing subject and uncover new information so they can disprove whatever it is that I've just talked to you about. Thank you.